function ready to go. Okay, we're recording. So in the chat, I want you to just comment if you think what the bicyclists are doing in this scenario, in this picture, based on what you can see is legal or not legal. And you're welcome to add any commentary to that or any questions that you have, but just testing it out. This isn't an exam, just to kind of get the juices flowing. So go ahead and answer in the chat.
And Tessa, we do have some answers coming in.
All right. Looks like we've got illegal, not side by side, single, probably legal, not legal. So we've got a mix in there. Okay, so this in fact is both legal and it's the safest place for the bicyclists to be riding on this roadway. They are operating as vehicles. They're using the rightmost lane, likely serving the destination that they're intending to go. They're riding with the flow of traffic. And it is legal in Idaho and most states to ride two abreast or side by side like they're doing in this photo, as long as they're not impeding the normal and reasonable flow of traffic. So based on what we can see in this image, they are operating legal in the roadway where they should be and the safest place for them to be riding. And the driver in this situation, which is where the photo's being taken from, hopefully safely, can easily move over to the lane to the left of the bicyclist to safely pass. All right, well, thanks everybody for contributing your comments in there. So it looks like we've got the chat function all figured out. So we'll be doing that, as we said, as we go through the presentation. So I do want to start just with some foundational information, why we are teaching bicycle friendly driver, where it came from, you know, what the objectives are. And then, like I said, we'll dive into the meat of this. So historically, outside of driver's education, most transportation safety and education programs have focused primarily on teaching bicyclists, teaching them how to safely operate, legally operate in the roadway. And while that's certainly still a focus for our organization, for other transportation safety organizations, how the bicyclist is behaving is really only one part of the equation when it comes to their safety and the safe operation of others on the roadway. And so the bicycle friendly driver program was really developed to address safety and prevent crashes more comprehensively, recognizing that at the end of the day, whether we're driving, biking, walking, or scootering, we all play a role in helping keep people safe out on the roadway and helping people get to where they want to go safely. Another important consideration in thinking about the origins of the bicycle friendly driver program and why we teach it today is really looking at, you know, like pedestrians, bicyclists are what we call vulnerable roadway users. When they're involved in a crash, they will have a much higher likelihood of being injured as compared to someone in a car. As everybody knows, when you're driving in a car, you have a lot of protection, you have airbags, and that's not the same for people that are out there on their bikes or walking. And so that's really the intent behind the bicycle friendly driver program, is to really help us as drivers do our part to keep vulnerable roadway users safe within our control. And this is really a great time for us to be teaching this class. We're seeing more people choosing to ride a bike in our communities. We're seeing gas prices increase, better weather. A lot of people are moving to Idaho, and communities are investing a lot more in their active transportation networks. And as a result, we're going to continue to see more people riding a bike to where they want to go. Related to this, we're seeing jurisdictions design roadways differently than maybe we've been used to in the past, with new types of bicycle infrastructure, bicycle facilities that maybe people weren't trained on when they took driver's education many years ago. And so that we take this opportunity with this class to provide a little bit of information about the different types of roadway designs, bicycle facilities that we're seeing out there today, and we're likely going to see more of on our streets, so that we know how to operate safely and what they're all about. Next slide, please. So I won't go into depth about bicycle crashes. We could spend a lot of time on this, but a couple takeaways I wanted to share. We are seeing an increase in the country in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. Data from Idaho has shown that the majority, almost 100%, 95% of reported bicycle crashes result in some level of injury to the bicyclist, noting that this, there are a lot of bicycle crashes that go unreported. So that isn't the full picture, but the point being that the percentage is significantly higher than what we might see for car crashes. Most serious and fatal crashes happen at intersections. So you'll see that as a focal point as we go through some of the common crashes and scenarios in this presentation. And then normally the data, or I'm sorry, nationally, the data show that about half of all bike and car crashes are due to motorist errors. And so on the next slide, you'll see that really one of the key takeaways and the principles with the Bicycle Friendly Driver program is that in most crashes, both users, whether it's the person driving, whether it's the person biking, could have done something differently to potentially prevent that crash from happening or minimize the injury that may have resulted. Okay, next slide. So by the end of this presentation, we're hoping that you all take something away, but more specifically, we hope that you'll have a better understanding of why we teach, what we teach cyclists and why, so that you have a better understanding of why someone might be behaving the way that they are when they're on a bike, how to safely share the road with people on bikes. As I mentioned previously, we'll talk a little bit about new types of bicycle infrastructure designs that we're seeing implemented in Idaho and throughout the country. And then common crashes and what we as drivers and as bicyclists can do to prevent those from occurring. And then we'll end with some information about other unique scenarios or situations that you may encounter when you're out there driving or riding a bike. All right. Okay, so first, what are we teaching bicyclists? So when we're doing a bicycle safety presentation or a bicycle commuter presentation, these are some of the things that we are instructing bicyclists about. So the primary principle that we teach is that cyclists fare best when they act and are treated as drivers of vehicles. A bicycle is defined as a vehicle by law and generally speaking has the same rights and responsibilities of that of somebody driving a car. There are some exceptions, but this is a great rule to follow. Other principles that we're teaching include riding defensively, being visible and predictable, so not to be weaving in and out of parked cars if you're riding down a street with parking. Communicate and make sure you're making eye contact with the drivers. And then unless you're obeying the stop is yield law or the Idaho stop law, which we'll spend a little bit of time on here in a little bit, to obey all traffic control devices. Next slide. Okay, so this is just to show that basically where you can expect to see people riding bikes. While there are some areas where it's unlikely that you might see somebody riding a bike, such as on the freeway, and some areas where you can expect to see a lot of people bicycling, such as urban areas or bike trails or streets that have been intentionally designed to encourage bicycling. This is a map, the bike map from Ada County Highway District, which shows there are bike routes throughout the county. The point being that we should, as drivers, be expecting to see someone biking or someone walking on pretty much anywhere we might drive a car. Just like people riding bikes are oftentimes riding for transportation, and their house or the bus stop or grocery store, wherever they're trying to go, may require them to be cycling on streets where you might not expect them. So when you're driving, expect to encounter someone on a bike pretty much anywhere you might go. Okay, so for the next few slides, I'm going to dive into a little bit of information about bicycle infrastructure or bicycle facilities, some of the more unique designs that we're seeing come about in communities in Idaho and certainly across the nation. So from the left, a sharrow, this is also called a shared lane marking. It's essentially a pavement marking that has become more common in recent years. They're typically used in situations where maybe there isn't enough space for a dedicated bicycle lane, which you see on the right, or along lower volume, lower speed roadways that may be recommended as bikeways. But they're really intended to communicate to drivers to expect to see a bicyclist here, and to communicate to bicyclists where the safest place for them to operate is in that lane. And then you're probably all familiar with bike lanes. These have been around for many years, except for turning movements or if you're crossing. This is going to be an exclusive space for somebody who's operating on a bicycle. Buffered bike lanes are shown in the image on the right. And these are becoming more commonly implemented in our communities where there's space to do so. The goal with the buffered bike lane is to really provide an additional buffered space essentially between the travel lane and the bike lane so that people riding bikes as well as people driving cars in that scenario have a little bit more space and separation to increase safety and comfort for people operating on that roadway. Next slide. Okay, so some unique traffic signals that you may have seen at bicycle and pedestrian oriented crossings. So the first one on the left, this is called a hybrid beacon. It's also referred to as a hawk crossing, such as the bird. This rests in black. So if there are no pedestrians or bicyclists that have activated the crossing, you're not going to see any lights. It will be black. But once it's activated by somebody wanting to cross the road, it starts to flash red, during which you will need to stop as a driver. And then it turns to solid red. When it's solid red as a driver, you need to stay stopped for the people to pass, cross the street. Once it turns flashing red, you still need to stop, but you can proceed through if it's clear to do so, if there's nobody crossing at that location. The second image in the middle, this is called a flashing beacon or an RRFB, which stands for rectangular rapid flashing beacon. These are often used at school crossings, trail crossings, where a full signal may not be warranted. If it's flashing, again, you need to stop. One thing I would just note, because we have these in several places throughout our communities. If you see this when you're driving your typical route, just to be cognizant that that may start flashing at any time and to be looking for people that may be crossing at that location. And then the third one is what's called a bike signal. We don't have any of these in Boise, and I'm not sure that we have any in Idaho, but we will likely see them here in the future. And you will see them in other urban areas throughout the country and throughout the world. But essentially, this is a signal that's dedicated for bicyclists. Oftentimes, they're placed at protected bike lane crossings. Next slide. All right, so green paint. Hopefully, everybody's seen some green paint out there in your community. So green paint is being used more often to essentially raise awareness of areas where you can expect to see bicyclists. The first picture we have on the left is what's called a bike box. The only one that we have here in the Treasure Valley or in Boise is on Capitol Boulevard at Myrtle. A bike box is designed basically to bring bicyclists up to the front of the intersection, where they're going to be more visible to drivers on all legs of the intersection, and also to give them a head start when they then cross that intersection when the light turns green. Green paint is also used, as shown in the middle picture, to denote merge zones. So this is where drivers would be potentially merging across a bike lane where you might have heavier volumes of bike traffic. In this case, you as the driver would need to merge or yield the right of way before crossing over to access the right turn lane there. And we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but the picture on the right shows a dashed bike lane that's approaching an intersection. This is also becoming more common in jurisdictions, really to make it clear to drivers that we need to be moving over after yielding to any oncoming bicyclists. We need to be moving over to make a right-hand turn. By law, a right turn should be made as close as practicable to the right-hand curb or edge of the roadway. This can also help prevent a common crash type that we see, which Lisa will speak about here in a minute. Okay, so protected bike lanes on the left. These have different names, terminology that are used in communities throughout the world. Separated bike lanes, raised bike lanes, cycle tracks, you name it. But the overall intent in the design is to provide an exclusive space for bicyclists that has some type of physical separator between the bike lane and the travel lane. This example is from Capitol Boulevard in Boise, which has a concrete buffer. Other examples include flexible posts, having the bike lane raised at the same level as the sidewalk. This type of infrastructure is becoming more common throughout our jurisdictions, as it's been shown to not only increase safety, but increase comfort and increase bicycle ridership. It's also something that is shown to make drivers feel more comfortable when operating in that space, because they have that additional buffer protection between them and the bicyclists. And then shared use pathways are basically multi-use pathways adjacent to the roadway, where bikes and pedestrians will be sharing that same space. And with this scenario, as drivers, you'll be seeing bicyclists potentially coming from both sides. So you'll just want to use extra caution when you're exiting or entering driveways and intersections. And then the last picture shows a Contraflow bike lane. This is basically a bike lane that is designed to go against traffic. So that's not typical with traffic law, but in some cases it does make sense based on the street design, or if there's a one-way street, and the infrastructure will be designed to tell bicyclists that you can travel the opposite way, and that's called a contraflow bike lane. And then last but not least, this is what's called a two-stage turn box. In Boise, we have these also on Capitol Boulevard. Basically, they're intended to help bicyclists make a left turn using a two-step process or a two-step maneuver, without having to cross over travel lanes in order to get into the left turn lane. This is, even if you don't have one of these green boxes, it's a trick that you can use if you're riding a bike and you don't feel comfortable maneuvering across the travel lanes to get into that left turn lane. You can operate it as basically a two-stage turn. So that's what the infrastructure is designed to do. And I think it works pretty well. And with that, we are going to move into any quick questions that you have. If you don't have any questions yet, we will dive right into the next section, where we'll start to talk about common crashes and just different scenarios and how to prevent them.
And Tessa, we had a couple questions in the chat, generally answered a couple of them, but one question was regarding children. If 25% of the crashes are related to kids, what's the breakdown of the other 75% of persons having crashes, if we know it? And I can say I don't know that, but it's a good question.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I don't have that information off the top of my head, but we certainly have that data, and that's something that we can share. We can share the demographics of the crash data that we have as a follow-up. But yeah, great question.
Great. Another question was, do the buffered bike lanes usually include bollards or some kind of physical protection?
So yeah, so buffered bike lanes are designed with paint as the buffer. When we talk about protected or separated bike lanes, those are going to have some type of physical delineation. So that could be bollards, that could be a curb. In some cases, communities are installing what's called parking protected bike lanes, where you actually move the parking away from the curb and you have the bike lane between the parking lane. But buffered bike lanes really just mean a painted buffer.
Mm-hmm. And then the last question that just came up in the box is regarding the two-stage turns. Why don't people just walk their bike and act like pedestrians?
Okay, go back to that slide. And that's certainly an option if people feel more comfortable getting up on the sidewalk and behaving as a pedestrian. That's an option for people to do that. But this is designed for people to stay in their bike lane and to use the infrastructure as it's designed to be able to execute a left turn. In this specific scenario, with the picture on the left, this is Capitol Boulevard. And so you have the curb protected bike lane that's bringing cyclists all the way up to the intersection. So it would be challenging for them to be able to move over into the left-hand turn lane to be able to make a left turn. So this gives them that direct way of being able to continue straight, reorient, and then continue on the street if they're trying to go left from that location.
Great, Tessa. And I think that is all the questions that I see in the chat box currently. Please keep the questions coming. We will be responsive to those as we move through the presentation. All right. Okay, so we'll just hop right into common crashes and how to avoid some of these things. I like to talk about these things to drivers, especially young drivers, and people who walk and bike and drive all need to recognize that we all have places to go. We don't all use the same form of transportation, but each place that we are choosing to go is important. How we get there isn't important. We just need to keep each other safe. So one of the most common things that we get surprised as drivers, and this has happened to me, it's happened to Tessa, and I imagine it's happened to everyone, is someone coming from your right when you least expect it. This is a right angle crash, and these can happen because we have laws that allow right turns on red. When we're making a right turn on red as a driver, the person on the sidewalk from either direction is probably seeing a walk light. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're driving. Many times we pull much further forward than the stop bar, which is right in front of our little drawing, the dark line. And we pull forward to see. If we recall our driver's ed instruction from so long ago, mine was when I was 14 and a half, and that was a long time ago, we're required to make 2 stops, one at the stop bar, assess the situation, is anyone coming from the right or the left? And then we move forward to find out, are there other vehicles coming from the right or the left before I make my right turn? We can be surprised by young people in this situation. They see the walk light, they don't see a reason why a car should be pulled all the way into the crosswalk, they just see the walk light. So we have to be extra careful as we warn pedestrians to look left, right, left. We also warn drivers, look left, right, left, right. All right, that's a pretty common crash. This is what that looks like. We're looking to our far left to make sure that the danger to us is not there. And we start to move our car before we actually move to the right. You can check your behavior the next time you get into a vehicle and see this is how we do it as drivers. And to make it clear, I do drive a car, and I also ride a bike, and I also walk. We have to be careful of that person to our immediate left when we're making a right. This is an example of a crash that happened in a parking lot. And the parking lots sometimes have roadways that go through them. If you're local here in the Treasure Valley, the village has a roadway that goes through the entire parking lot. Another one of my favorites is the parking lot at Eagle and Fairview, where Albertsons and the Craft Warehouse and some other good destinations are. And we have roadways that actually go through the whole parking lot. We may have bicyclists in those parking lots. In this case, a crash happened where a driver was leaving their parking stalls and going to the actual road that goes through the parking lot. A bicyclist was coming through the parking lot, but on the wrong side of the road. As a reminder, bicyclists should ride on the right-hand side of the road, as drivers should drive on the right-hand side of the road. In this case, the two intersected with each other, and the driver didn't expect that person on the bike to be coming from that immediate right-hand position, and they did crash. The bicyclist did land on the windshield of the vehicle, and they did survive this crash, though they did receive an injury. There's a couple of things that we could have done better here. Everyone has a part in this. Number one, the bicyclist should ride with the flow of traffic on the proper side of the road, and the motorist should look in every direction before making the turn in case there is somebody there. And that could be a pedestrian too. We have people walking through parking lots or people in skateboards and all kinds of things. So we want to make sure that we assess the situation. As a quick reminder here, we have a tendency to be immune to what it might be like to be in a crash like this. And I want to remind everyone that having a person land on your windshield is not something that will physically, most of the time, physically not harm you, but psychologically it will live with you. And it's something that we need to be cognizant of, whether we like people biking or walking or not, that we are all actually humans out there. So here's a question for you to put up in the chat. Is this legal? This is a roundabout or not? So I'm going to give you a minute or so to put your question or your answer, legal or not, in the chat box, and then I'll shift the slide that says what it is. Okay, I've got a couple of legals coming in.
It's like a lot of legals in there.
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. All right. Oh, yes, you all are spot on. It is legal. All right. If I can get my slide to go. There we go. It is legal. The roundabouts are pretty special. They're challenging to all of us, but it is legal for a person to be in this position in a roundabout, and they can, according to Idaho law, ride side by side unless they're delaying traffic. You will see sharrows in most of the roundabouts and entrances and exits off of the sidewalk, so they can be challenging. All right. So why do people ride in the lane? It's often the safest place to ride. Sometimes we're not allowed to ride on the sidewalk. Sometimes there are too many people on the sidewalk. Sidewalks can also be narrow, carry goat heads, and usually is unsafe because of driveways, other roadway users, broken sidewalks, and it might not serve the destination correctly. A sidewalk is a sidewalk, not a side ride. And in the state here, if a bike lane is there, you should be in the bike lane. It's not illegal to ride on the sidewalk, to be clear, but it's usually not as safe. You also might ride in the center lane position to prevent being buzzed or sideswiped, especially in narrow lanes. We know now that there are triggers on the signals that will help the bicyclist make a turn or to trigger the light. So, you know, as a driver, sometimes those lights will turn red or green right when you roll up. That's because of the triggers on the cameras on the signal head. So bicyclists can also activate those, and preparing for a left-hand turn. We do need to be in the right lane, the correct lane position to make the movement that we're going to do. That's usually the rightmost part of the lane that serves the end destination. In this case, a left-hand turn, you'd be more on the left-hand side of the road because you're going left. Couple things to note also, why people might ride in the lane. Again, on the left-hand side, this is serving the rightmost destination or the forward destination. You may be next to a dedicated right-hand turn lane. And while the state codes say that a person on a bicycle can use the right turn lane to move through the intersection, it is confusing. As drivers, we see a right-hand turn lane, we think you're going to make a right-hand turn. When you have that cyclist ride forward out of a right-hand turn lane, that can create confusion. So we're also giving a clear message that we're moving through the intersection. The right-hand photo is one of our favorite things. Having snow or debris in the bike lane will create a hazard for anyone biking. And let us not think that there are no one or no reason to ride a bicycle in the wintertime. There are many people that do not actually have that choice to not ride a bike. I just want you to think about that for a minute and take a look at that snow. It also challenges you as a driver to get out of your vehicle into a snow-filled bike lane, okay? And again, the signal head, you can see the camera to the right of the traffic signal that is detecting someone at the signal. So you're going to see people actually more center if they understand that that camera is what trips the light. Here's another question for you. The chat is wide open. Is this legal or not? Okay, looks like we've got a legal coming in, a couple of legals. All right, if you're unsure, legal but unsafe, maybe, and not sure, perfect. Okay, I'll give you the answer. It is legal. And one of my favorite things, Commissioner Hanson is correct, it does invite passing. Take a look at this as a driver, think about it from your view. What's the speed limit on the road? We don't know. The riders, what they can see is debris on the side of the road. We have a hill in front of us and we have multiple driveways. Is it a safe place to pass on the double yellow? Keep that in your mind because we're going to look at that again. Cyclists ride on the lane, again, avoiding the debris. If it's too narrow, to share, to be more visible, to increase motorist awareness of people, and to avoid the door zone. And we'll talk about the door zone in a minute. We have another crash that we want to talk about. We're all familiar with freeway overpasses here in the valley and anywhere we go. And typically a freeway overpass has to be high enough for trucks to pass underneath it. So you have an arch basically, so sight distance can be limited. In this crash scenario, a driver of a very large vehicle was coming up upon a bicyclist who was riding to the far right of the road and attempted to make the pass on the overpass, and recognized that a motor vehicle was coming from the other direction and moved over to the right. And unfortunately, they did hit the cyclist. In this case, the cyclist was killed. And we could have avoided something like this. And we want to talk about this for a whole second. The cyclist could have taken the whole lane. It's hard to do that though, when you may not be confident as a rider. Most of us haven't taken professional bicycling class. We've been given a bicycle, or we get a bicycle and we think this is going to be great. And we go ride, and we don't think about, what does the overpass look like? Can people see me? Should I be in the middle of the lane? The motorist, however, has an experience on the roadway driving a large vehicle. Can I see on the other side of the overpass? Is there something obscuring my vision? Is there enough time to get through if a car was coming? A lot of times when we see a pass like this happening, especially if there's a hill or something there, all of a sudden the driver is like, oh my goodness, here comes a car, and they move over, forgetting that there was a bicyclist there next to them, even though they had seen them before. When you see a white bike like this, you may see them around the state, around the country, and around the world. The white bike designates that someone has been killed here. That's called a ghost bike. So if you didn't know that, that actually is the truth. So moving on to the door zone, as I promised. The door zone is where a person opens their door into active traffic without thinking about it. Lots of times, especially in urban situations, we'll find bike lanes right in the door zone. If you're familiar with downtown Boise, one of my favorites to talk about is Bannock Street. If you have a large vehicle or even a Prius, your door will open as wide as the actual bike lane. And so this is when we're going to see people moving to the outside of the bike lane, because they know or may have had an experience where a door suddenly opens in front of them. Now, lots of times we can avoid that just by scanning. Did someone just park? Did someone just get in their car? We might know a few things as people riding bikes. As drivers, am I parked next to a bike lane? Did I just pass a bicyclist when I was parking my car? All of those things are a reminder to us. And also, it's a state code. If you didn't know, you must check before you open your door, whether you're the driver sitting in the driver's seat or the passenger in the front or the back, and make sure that the area around your car is clear. If you've ever had a person walking next to your car as a passenger and you open up the door, it's very shocking. If you're the driver, you open up into a bicyclist, you may throw that bicyclist out into the street. As drivers, I want to remind you, if you see someone riding close to a car, I would drive away from that in case that car door opens. The car door opens and you see that happen, you may not have time to brake. So pay attention to what's there on the roadway. So we have a couple of comments coming in that, yes, we want to talk about what you can do to try to avoid that as a driver. We call this the Dutch reach, where you use the opposite hand, your right hand, to reach across and grab the door handle. You pull the door handle in, and then you're required to push. And as you push that door open with your opposite hand, your reach is limited, and you turn your body and look behind you. When I'm teaching driver's ed classes, check your rear view mirror, check your top mirrors, look over your shoulder, use your opposite hand. Do I remember every time? No, but I do remember to check my mirrors. And I do remember, did I pass a bicyclist? Am I next to a bike lane? So that Dutch reach actually does work, and it's nice for a top shoulder stretch also, because Driving fills us with tension. Okay. Another question for you. Legal or not? There's a lot to look at in this photo. All right. All right, so we've got quite a few answers coming in. Yep, it's true. This is legal. This is complicated. So the cyclists are riding in the correct position. That's legal. The driver in the red vehicle passed the cyclists crossing over the double yellow line, which we have confirmed with the police here in Idaho a few times. Passing a slow moving vehicle crossing over the double yellow is legal as long as it's safe to do so and in a slow situation. So if you're passing a grain truck or a mail truck or a bicyclist or a pedestrian walking on the roadway, you can do that slowly. Take a close look at this picture though. In the very forward of the picture, there's an oncoming vehicle. The driver of the white car is not doing something legal because they cannot see all the way forward. So they may be in that situation where that red truck comes back over into the lane and all of a sudden there's a car right in front of that person who's passing behind also, and they move over immediately to the right. And that's when we get into the situation like the dump truck on the overpass. We've moved right suddenly because we didn't think about everything that was in front of us. Okay, so, right, moving on to safe passing. Passing can be complicated. You treat any other person you're passing like you would treat any other person you're passing. It doesn't matter if they're on a bike, scooter, skateboard, walking. You treat them like you would pass anybody else. You may have to cross a double yellow. Again, we talked about that to allow 3 feet. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot during the last 2 years during this pandemic is 3 feet has been determined to not be safe to be around people. 3 feet's too close to pass another human being on the roadway. If we measure 3 feet out from us, most people's wingspan is close to that. It feels too close. So what we recommend is changing lanes to pass if there is room to do that. If there's not, don't make a hallelujah move and close your eyes and hope for the best. Wait until it's safe to do so. That's the basic tenet of driving. And you return to your lane when the bicyclist is in your mirror. What's interesting about the center photo is this is a typical Idaho road look where we might be driving to Idaho City, we might be driving up by Coeur d'Alene, we could be driving anywhere around Highway 55 particularly. And can we actually see what's around the corner? Are we prepared for someone to be there? I think about that all the time because we haven't gone through driver's ed for a very long time and we need to think about those things. All right, put any questions you might have in the box. We'll come to those here in a few. We've got another legal or not. If you've ever been on a bike, you might know what this feels like. In the city of Boise, not. Yeah. Nowhere is this legal. You know, nowhere is this legal. It's legal for the bicyclist. Commissioner Hanson, you got it right. It's illegal for the driver to pass that close. Okay. As drivers, we are tending to get bigger vehicles to feel safer. And the bigger vehicle, the wider it is, the wider your mirrors are. Do you know where they are? Again, I'll remind you, try to change lanes to pass. Don't go too close to the bicyclist. If you have oncoming traffic in this kind of a situation, slow down and wait until it's time to pass or safe to pass. Okay. All right, another common crash is the right hook. This is where you've overtaken a cyclist and make a right turn. And it's getting more complicated out there for all of us driving and riding. Electric vehicles, whether it be a bicycle, skateboard, a scooter, or electric car, are making it challenging for everyone. Electric cars are more quiet. People can't hear those as much. Electric bikes, scooters, and skateboards are going faster. A reminder, when you're going to make a right-hand turn, if you have a bicyclist in front of you and you think, I can make it to that intersection, remember, when we make right-hand turns, we have to slow down to make the turn. If a person is on an electric bike, electric scooter, or something else, they will probably catch up with you and you can turn right in front of that cyclist. And that can create a situation that's very hard to avoid. A right hook happens when the bicyclist is cut off and unable to stop in time. Typically, the cyclist hopefully will roll off the back of the vehicle across the top of the trunk. Sometimes, most awfully, they will get pulled underneath the rear wheels of the car, especially with a large vehicle. So if you're a person who rides a bike and I've just scared the death into you and out of you, I want to remind you, in these situations as cyclists, you can take the center lane position if you know you're going straight through the intersection to prevent any crashes from happening. If you see a person flip on their turn signal, they pass you, slow down, use your brakes, and move to the center lane after scanning over your shoulder. And this is legal. So Tessa talked earlier about the dashed lines. And we see a person over in the bike lane wanting to make a turn. And technically this is legal if the lines are dashed. A person can move over into that area. You could put your agreement or disagreement with this. We'll come back to this particular topic right here. So when you are driving and you are rolling up to a stoplight and you have a bike lane next to you, if you're the first person in that intersection and those dashed lines are there, you should enter the bike lane as long as no other biker is there. That's shown in the center picture. The left-hand side photo or picture shows the driver not close to curb and the bicyclist right next to the vehicle. In this situation, if you're the driver coming up to the turn, there's a biker already waiting in that position. You will wait behind the biker until the light turns green. The bicyclist will move forward through the intersection and then you will make your turn. If you arrive in the bike lane first, as in the far right picture, you will merge into that bike lane and then the bicyclist will queue up behind you if they know what they're doing. I want to make a huge warning here that, again, most people haven't gone through the kind of training that Tessa and I have gone through and thought about what's my lane position for biking. We give kids bikes for Christmas and don't think about this kind of thing. We'll have riders that will ride right up to the right-hand side of your car. I've had this happen to me in my car. They ride right up into that tiny little space. There's nowhere to move. And one of the things I'll warn you of, because this was my experience and this happens, I rolled down my window as a bike educator and said, hey, and that's all the further I got. And then they started yelling at me. I had my right turn signal on. I was far right into the lane and it can get really complicated. So the more we know as drivers, the more we know as bicyclists, the better off we're going to get along. If you have any questions about that one, we'll probably need to ride or walk that one because it's really complicated. The basic thing to think about here is just make sure you know what's around your car before you turn. Okay. The other common crash that we see, the left cross. And the left cross, unlike the right hook, is an accelerated crash. So when you're turning left, you're accelerating into that to make it across the intersection. You're looking for danger as drivers coming towards you, which usually is another motor vehicle. And you might not be thinking about a bicyclist who may be a little bit further back, a bicyclist or a pedestrian on the sidewalk. We may have flashing yellow lights that allow us to make a turn, and pedestrians or bicyclists are still coming from that other direction. It can be very complicated. We also may not be able to see anything. And this is where some of the most fatal crashes happen. And these are some of the hardest ones to avoid. My reminder on this one is, as drivers, we need to take a breath and slow down. Don't just try to shoot the gap when you have heavy traffic. We can't see what's in the sidewalk. We can't see what's in the bike lane. Our vision is obscured in left turns and heavy traffic. I have a friend who did pass away from a crash like this. The driver was very young who hit our friend, and I don't know how to make that right. Sorry, that's a little bit emotional for me. The driver of the white car there does have a lot of blind spots, and I know of a recent crash that happened between a pedestrian and a pedestrian and a car driver out on Cloverdale, where a pedestrian was coming from the area that's in the immediate left part of the sidewalk, and they were walking across the driveway, and the driver turned and didn't see them. Many times as drivers, we don't think I should look all the way hard left to make sure that nobody's leaving the sidewalk and using the crosswalk. That's just a reminder to everyone. These left turn factors include the vehicle shadows, as I showed before in that picture. If we're around a large vehicle and we can't see what's in front of us, much less the stoplight, be prepared, cover the brake, and assess the situation before you make any turns or move straight through the light. Again, in the middle, difficult to judge speeds because of new technology. And then shadows on the roadway. Can we actually see what's in front of us? If you've ever driven on a Sunday evening down Idaho 21 from Idaho City or Loman and gone into the corners and see the shadows on the roadway, can we see anything in those corners? Is it always safe to drive? Something to think about. All right, so that's my section. Are there any questions that we need to address?
Looks like we have a couple comments, and feel free to add if you have any other questions that just came up, feel free to add those in the chat. So one of the questions here, Lisa, is about the 3-foot passing law, and a question around whether there are other locations outside of Boise where that is the case, and what does that look like elsewhere?
Sure. So from my research so far, I don't know of any other jurisdiction in the state that has a 3-foot to pass law. I can admit fully that Coeur d'Alene sticks out in my mind as somewhere that might have that, but I am not sure of that. Many states across the country have shifted their bicycle laws to address that passing, to either put a 3-foot to pass law in place or change lanes to pass, which I think is a more important part of sharing the roadway. Changing lanes to pass is safer for everybody. But 3 feet, I would just, get your measuring stick out and measure 3 feet from you and your car and think, how does this feel? And measure it 3 feet from your rearview mirror. It's pretty interesting.
We had a comment, not a question, but if Lisa wants to speak more to this, just about dooring and concerns around having bike lanes to the right of parking because of the potential conflict with the door zone in that scenario. So not sure if Lisa wants to share any more about that, but that was a comment that we saw there.
I think that's a good one to think about, putting bike lanes to the right of motor vehicles or parked cars. We see that in some places. Only if that's designed correctly is that safe. And we still need to recognize that passengers exiting vehicles like Uber or Lyft, those are still dooring incidents on the opposite side of the car. So the best thing that we can do is to be aware of the situation. I appreciate the comment. There are places, I think in Fort Collins, where there's double buffers. And I've seen that actually in Washington, D.C. also. You have a double buffer, one for the car door and one for moving traffic, and the bike lanes in the middle of everything. We don't have that kind of roadway space here. So the onus becomes, unfortunately, shoved mostly on the cyclists a lot of times because of our feelings about how people move around. But I would suggest that we do need to take some responsibility when we get out of our cars before we open the door to look.
So Lisa, we have another question that came in. Any tips for biking on streets with slip lanes for right vehicles? So the example that was provided is Glenwood traveling toward Gary Lane?
Glenwood towards Gary Lane. So the slip lane there at State Street, and I think we have the opposite end of Glenwood. Chinden at Glenwood has a slip lane also. When you know you're going to make a through movement as a cyclist, you are scanning behind you. This is how I do it. I scan behind me. If I'm not comfortable and there's a sidewalk in these kind of situations where it's heavy traffic, I may be on the sidewalk if I can't get through a slip lane. That slip lane at Gary Lane and Glenwood at State is dangerous. We have 2 left turn lanes, a double set of through lanes, and a right dedicated lane. No true bicycle facility there. School zone forward, a walk zone for schools. And if we are people driving and we see somebody biking on the roadway and we know we need to make the right turn in the slip lane, we need to wait until that's clear before we make our movement into that area. I cannot emphasize enough, and I'm sorry I take such a serious thing. I spent a lot of time in driver's education. So I cannot emphasize enough how much more responsibility we need to take when we're driving to never make an assumption that something is going to go right. Always assume that you need to pay attention. So those slip lanes, I'm thinking particularly of some slip lanes that are new out on Eagle at Amity. There's a huge roundabout out there, and we have multi-use path out there. More and more attention has to be paid to what else is out there on the road? Who else is traveling with us? It's not just the person in the lane next to us, it's the person in the bike lane next to us, the person in the sidewalk next to us. Sorry, I could go on for days about that.
All right, we have another question here about the legality of bicycling in the street when there's a dedicated bike path just off the road. So the location that's given is Ketchum as an example.
Oh, okay. So for Ketchum, does the bike path serve the destination that the person is going? Do we know what that bicyclist is doing? Are they going to work? Are they going to school? Do they just leave their house and are trying to get to the bike path? I think about that a lot because I see people biking on Chinden. I see people occasionally biking on the freeway. I see people biking in places where it doesn't feel very comfortable, but I don't know where they're going. I don't know where they came from. And I think the same thing could be said for us as drivers. None of us know which way we're going until we use our turn signals and become more predictable on the road. So yes, there may be a fully functional bike path. Having been on that bike path, it does take you around the services or destinations that a person might want to get to.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so maybe going back to the previous comment about slip lanes, if we could provide just a quick explanation of what a slip lane is so everybody's on the same page there.
Sure. So a slip lane is what allows you to make a right turn without stopping traffic, basically. So I think of slip lanes that are local here in Boise. There's one on Broadway, really close to the Whole Foods, the Broadway and the University of Idaho Water Center. There's a slip lane right there. And we've got, I think, 3, almost 4 forward lanes going through on Broadway, and then a dedicated right-hand turn lane. And it may be separated by a hard median or hard buffer for that right turn to happen. There may be a pedestrian refuge in that little hard buffer. Another one local would be Vista at Overland. If you're going to go westbound on Overland and you're going south on Vista, there's a dedicated slip lane right there. So those slips allow a free running right turn, essentially. I know we have some traffic professionals here with us, so if I missed something on that, Meg, you could speak up about that, or Commissioner Hanson, you're welcome to speak about that slip lane if you'd like to.
Yeah, okay. I think that was a great explanation, basically allowing you to turn right without having to enter the intersection. Getting onto the freeway, those are good examples.
Great. All right.
So
Lisa, I would just add that a slip lane is not an invitation to drivers not to look.
Right.
So they have to look just as if they had to stop at a corner. So,
Right.
but of course, we're not giving them that signal in the design. It's like we're
Right.
inviting them not to look. And oftentimes, once they've started making that turn, it's really hard for them to then look way over their left shoulder.
Mhm. And that's very true. And also with that slip lane, we go into those with some speed because we assume. And the slip lanes usually have a pedestrian crossing in them. The one at Broadway and Whole Foods area has a pedestrian crossing. The one at Vista and Overland has a pedestrian crossing. Eagle and Amity pedestrian crossing. I can't say enough about how careful we need to be as drivers and how we have to think about that. No matter where you go, if you stay in Idaho your whole life and never go outside of the state, if tomorrow you're going to New York City or Seattle or Ammon or wherever, you're still going to deal with these things, and we have to make better choices. All right, I'm too passionate about that. Go
I
ahead.
appreciate you explaining the Dutch reach again, because it just makes you mindful when I park a lot downtown to pay attention to the way you get out. And I think doing that Dutch reach really does make you realize you need to be looking outside your door. So thanks for the reminder.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. If you want a little sticker to put on your dashboard, I have little stickers that I had made several years ago that you can just put one on your dashboard. Remember to look over your shoulder, use the Dutch reach. So, all right, should we go ahead and move on, Tessa?
Yeah, we've got a few more slides and then we'll open it up at the end if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we'll let you all go a little early. And then, like I said, we'll follow up with the exam if anybody's interested in taking that. So these are just a few other scenarios that you may experience when driving, when bicycling, whether you're in Idaho or other locations. So I think, you know, we've all experienced sun glare when we're out there driving, which can significantly impact our ability to see other roadway users. So, you know, there are some tips for just making sure that you're keeping your windshields clean, both on the inside and the outside. But then, you know, thinking about it, kind of the bigger picture of the implications or the potential risk of not being able to see when you're out there driving, and just thinking that, you know, it's at the end of the day, it's not worth the risk if you can't see other roadway users. So if there's a possibility, if you're in that situation and you're not able to see very, very clearly, you know, thinking about whether or not you could take another route or wait a few minutes until the sun glare isn't quite as bad, or leave a little bit earlier. So just some things to be cognizant of there. The middle picture is talking about illegal courtesies. So does anybody want to chime in and share, you know, their thoughts on what an illegal courtesy is when we're talking about bicycle and pedestrian traffic safety? If anybody's heard of that before. All right. So basically an illegal courtesy is if you're at an intersection and you're a driver or another user and you are basically waving the bicyclist or waving the pedestrian to go through the intersection, even though maybe they didn't have the right of way in that scenario. It's a friendly thing to do. And I know personally, I appreciate that, and I know the intent is good, but oftentimes what that can do is it can set up an unintended situation or an unsafe situation where maybe one, as the driver has waved that bicyclist through to pass at that location, or the pedestrian to cross, and they may not see that there's another lane of traffic, and that other driver that's coming in that other lane of traffic is not also recognizing what's happening at the intersection. So it's always something to be cognizant of as the driver when you're, you know, affording people that illegal courtesy, even though, like I said, it is, we know the intent is good. It can just sometimes set up a situation that's not safe for all of the users at that location. So the third picture we have here is about parking in a bike lane. The main point here is that it's not illegal, and it can create an unsafe situation for everybody using that roadway. If you're not sure if it's a bike lane or a parking lane, a good rule of thumb, as you can see in this picture, is if you get out of your vehicle and you can see that your wheels are on the opposite side of the white lane, there's a pretty good chance that that's not designed as a parking lane. So just some things to think about there. Next slide.
Tessa, can I say one thing here?
Sure.
On the parking in the bike lane, why it's so dangerous is because a bicyclist cannot determine if you just got there or if you just got in your car and are going to leave there. So this creates a potential dooring situation or a potential pulling out in front of somebody's situation. And this can kill people. So just to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to get the slide to advance. Here we go.
All right, so we're all familiar with blind spots with vehicles these days and airbags and everything that's going into the protection of the vehicle. There are obviously blind spots that are created. And when you think about vulnerable roadway users, bicyclists, pedestrians, they can easily fit into that blind spot. So just making sure that if you're driving that you're scanning, you're checking multiple times to make sure that you're not, that somebody isn't being hidden through one of your blind spots. And then children, youth, we could have an entire presentation. I know Lisa could share a lot of knowledge about youth and cycling and tips that we provide not only to drivers, but to youth as part of Safe Routes to School curriculum. But just some general tips or takeaways here. I think as we all understand, kids are not going to have the same understanding of traffic laws as adults. They can be easily hidden by cars or other obstructions when they're out on neighborhood streets or in other locations. They don't have the same depth perception when they're crossing a roadway. And we tend to see youth bicycling more often on the sidewalk. And in some cases, that's going to be encouraged depending on their age. So just some things to think about when we're driving around our communities and the different types of users that we might see out there bicycling and walking. Okay, so this one we wanted to save towards the end. And I'll ask again if anybody wants to share either in the chat or unmute yourself and share. If you have any thoughts about the Idaho stop law, or if you've heard of the Idaho stop law, it's also referred to as stop as yield. Got one comment in here. I love the Idaho stop law. So any others that have heard of it or want to share anything about it? Okay, so basically the Idaho stop law, this is a law that was first adopted in Idaho, hence the name Idaho stop law, back in 1982. And basically what it does is it allows people on bikes to treat stop signs as yield signs. So they still, as they're approaching an intersection with that's stop controlled, they still have to yield the right of way to any other users at the intersection, but they are able to treat that stop sign as a yield sign. And then at red lights, they're able to treat red lights as stop signs. So they do need to come to a full stop. And then if it's clear to proceed, again, yielding the right of way to any other oncoming traffic, cyclists are able to proceed through that intersection if it's safe to do so. So that's definitely an important consideration for drivers here in Idaho. This type of law is also being or has been adopted in other municipalities and other states throughout the country based on the knowledge and the research that's been done here in Idaho, showing that this does have a positive impact on crash reduction. But definitely something for everybody to be aware of so that there's no hostility when you might see a bicyclist roll through a stop sign or go through a red light at an intersection, again, if it's safe to do so. Lisa, anything you want to add on that?
No, I don't think so. Actually, yes. If you just moved here, if you have family that's just moved here, remind them of the stop law. It's very important. If you have children in your life, make sure that they understand it clearly. We don't recommend it being used under 6th grade because of a lack of understanding of how fast people are driving. But the stop law is very important for roadway safety. Ultimately, it clears the intersection before turns can happen, and it's not used everywhere. Just because it's a law doesn't mean people are going to use it. So be clear on that. Okay.
Okay, so you've all seen electric bikes, electric assist bikes, e-scooters, hoverboards, one wheels, you name it, all sorts of different types of electric vehicles and devices that are becoming more popular in our communities around the country, around the world. These have definitely introduced different considerations and dynamics for the user experience and safety on our roadways. And I'm sure everybody has a different opinion on whether or not you like e-scooters or you like e-bikes or where they should be, things like that. But at the end of the day, these types of devices or these types of vehicles are helping increase mobility in our communities. They're helping give people the ability to get to where they want to go more efficiently, sustainably, and more affordably. So there are certainly some positives of these different types of devices. The takeaway here is that as drivers, we do need to be aware that people are using different electric devices and vehicles to get around our communities. And this is going to become more common moving forward. So e-bikes, e-scooters generally fall under the same code as traditional bikes here in Boise. And I believe that's the same for the state, at least for e-bikes, and share the same rights and responsibilities as drivers of vehicles. The speeds may be different, so that's certainly something that you want to be aware of. I think Lisa touched on this earlier. If you're looking at judging speed of an oncoming bicyclist or a bicyclist that's approaching you from behind, just thinking about if somebody's riding an electric bike, we don't know how fast that e-bike is traveling. So giving people a little bit more time to make sure that it's clear for you to continue through that intersection or make a turn depending on where you're going. The other thing I would mention just with e-scooters is that we tend to see these more often using sidewalks in our communities. So just being cognizant, especially if we're in urban or commercial areas, there are going to be more people using these different mobility devices on the sidewalk. So being very careful at those intersections. Okay, so to wrap it up, we've certainly covered a lot of content today and appreciate everybody's involvement in the chat and the discussion and all the great questions. Just to summarize a few of the key takeaways from this presentation. So bicyclists are drivers of vehicles. So as a reminder, we are telling people to essentially drive your bike when you're out there. And so that's something to be very mindful of when you're driving your car around people biking. Both roadway users can take action to avoid bike and car crashes. One thing to recognize, and Lisa did talk about this, is not all bicyclists have received formal education. So you may see people out there biking the wrong way in the bike lane. And even though that may not be legal, they may have learned growing up that that's the safest place for them to ride. So just as drivers, being cognizant of that and those potential behaviors that you may see and doing our part to be able to prevent that potential crash from happening. Paying special attention at intersections and driveways. This is where the majority of crashes occur. So just taking extra time, looking multiple times before you make a movement. Understanding when and why cyclists take the lane. And for the driver perspective, you may not always see what that hazard might be in the bike lane or in the shoulder or why they're taking the lane, but just know that they have the right to do that and they're likely doing that for a reason to protect their safety. Abide by the safe passing rules, whether it's 3 feet or ensuring that you're providing safe distances when you're passing a bicyclist. If it's questionable, if you ever have any doubt of whether or not you can squeeze around a bicyclist or get around before the vehicle is approaching you from the other way, it's better to just wait to keep everybody safe. And at the end of the day, roadway users are all people. This is something that we've emphasized throughout the presentation, trying to get to where they want to go. And regardless of how they choose to get there, whether it's on a bike, a scooter, driving a car, taking a bus, we all have responsibility to do our part to protect people and to help minimize the potential for any crashes in our communities. With that, I think that's all we have for you today, but we do have a few more minutes. So if there are any other questions that have come in, we can answer those. Like I said, we will certainly follow up with an email with some of the questions that we didn't get to and with the instructions on the exam. But are there any other questions that folks have in the final few minutes here?
We've got a couple, Tessa, and one was a direct message to me about helmet laws. And turns out I have my bike helmet right here with me because I like to talk about this bike helmet. This is not the only thing that keeps a person on a bike safe. We have a tendency to shove that safety right down somebody's throat. If they didn't have a helmet on, it's their fault. If my body's destroyed down below my helmet, but my head is safe, that didn't help. It's all of our behavior and how we're acting on the roadway. There is no helmet law in the state of Idaho. There are helmet laws that surround us in different states. And what's important to remember about that is that it can discourage people from riding bikes. It can exclude people who don't have financial means or ability to have a bicycle helmet. And bike share programs across the country, which add options for transit for people, don't come with an automatic helmet. So a bike helmet is part of our personal protective equipment, but it also, it can't help if somebody doesn't pay attention. My legs get run over, I'm not helped by that helmet at all. So pay attention to that. I know King County, I think it was King County, Washington, might have just taken away their helmet law. That was a big, huge law in King County for a long time that every person had to wear a helmet. I could be wrong about that, but I just read something. It's either King County or somewhere over here in the West that just dumped a helmet law.
You're right, Lisa.
Okay,
This
great.
is good.
Lisa, we
Sounds
have
good.
a good question in here that maybe you saw from Jerry. How can a bicyclist use the full lane and not impede traffic? I would be very
Right.
uncomfortable using a whole lane.
Right. I think that's really true. You would use a whole lane only when it's necessary to do so. So there are situations like, Jerry, I don't know where you live, but if you live in the Treasure Valley and you're familiar with, let's say, Emerald Street that cuts across the valley east to west, and the Emerald Overpass that is pretty close to the mall. So it's between Curtis Road and Cole Road. And in that case, we have limited sight distance and a narrow roadway. And if a person riding a bicycle in the shoulder area is just in that shoulder area, and you have large vehicles which do pass over that overpass passing you, you may be squeezed or knocked off of your bike by the mirrors. And so there are certain roadway situations where it's too narrow to not ride in the center lane, or if you know that you're going to be making a left turn, you've got to move over, that would be a place where you'd ride solely in the middle or to the farther left, and always using your hand signal. My left arm's out, my right arm's out. I may have this up. This is also a right hand turn. This is my left arm, right angle. If you don't understand that, I've got both arms out. State law says you should have one hand on the handlebars, but if you don't understand, and this down signal, that means I'm stopping. And those signals to you as a driver are going to show you some things that the cyclist is going to do. And it's important to pay attention to those things. I don't know if that helps. I don't feel comfortable riding in the middle of the road all the time either. Sharrows are hard. Yes, I think it's temporary. Riding in the center of the lane is temporary. It's what is your destination? Tessa showed the bike map at the beginning, the ACHD put out, and you don't have to ride on a main road. There are ways to go around if you have the time, so you don't have to be in a terrible traffic situation. If we're working in a small town, like I'm from Orofino, I may have to ride in the center of the lane through town, and there's logging trucks, but because of the roadway design, it might dictate something different. If I can find a different route, I will. But that's important about route finding. Hopefully that answers.
So Jerry's follow-up, so using the whole lane is temporary.
Right.
Question mark. And so it's, I think to Lisa's point, it's really going to depend on the design of the infrastructure. If that's the safest place for you to be is in the center of the travel lane, it may not be a temporary place in that situation. But if you do have a dedicated bike lane or a shoulder, as a cyclist, you're likely going to be to the right if it's safe to be there and there are no hazards. But again, it really depends on the design of the infrastructure, how wide the travel lane is, things like that, because you don't, as a cyclist, you don't want to be pinched over into the curb, where somebody might try to pass you and you're creating an unsafe situation for yourself and for others.
Right. Lisa put in a comment about the roundabouts, safer for the cyclists, but with the 2-lane roundabouts, they are trickier for the bicyclists. And I would tend to agree that the roundabouts are made to make people go slower. But when we have 2 lanes, people do have a tendency to have increased speed. And I'm personally not finding a lot of comfort in a 2-lane roundabout as a bicyclist. So if the exits and the sidewalk are there, I might use that. But at the same time, I'm thinking about the slip lanes, right? So people are making right turns out of roundabouts. Those legs happen all over the roundabouts, and you have the pedestrian crossings. If you're up on the sidewalk and you're riding a bike at speed, you're in the same kind of situation. So whether or not it's comfortable, it's all about your route, and where you live might dictate your route and how comfortable you are. I would offer this, Tessa and I didn't really talk about this, but if you're interested in taking an on-bike class, we would love to work with you. And we're not, don't have to be fast bikers. We don't have to be super slow. We could travel to a different place, but we would be glad to help negotiate some of these tougher infrastructure programs and find out what it actually feels like. So let us know.
Okay, so we have one question from Nicole Stern. So wondering if this presentation will be available to share with others following our session today. And yes, this is being recorded, and it will be made available by AARP following this. So we'll make sure to send that link out to everybody, and you're welcome to share with your networks. And then, we are planning to host more of these moving forward. So encourage folks to sign up if you enjoyed this. And then, like Lisa said, we also do bicycle specific classes of varying lengths and varying content. So always invite anybody that's interested to attend those.
So Tessa, this is Marie. I just wanted to let everybody know that these presentations are put on YouTube. So whenever we do a presentation like this, within a day, they will be out on the YouTube channel, and it's under NKA Idaho. So just so if you want to pass that on to anyone, or someone wasn't able to make it today, that's where they'll be sitting, and they sit there for quite a while. You'll see presentations we've done for the throughout the year, and that'll be somewhere you can pick this up. And I know that you have put your email addresses in the chat, both Tessa and Lisa. So if you have any questions for them, I would go ahead and get those email addresses. We, AARP, are not able to transmit back to anyone on this through email. It's just a guideline for us. We can't use them, can't use your emails to get back to you. So if you have something specific that you want to address with either one of these two, please look at their email addresses. They're in the chat right now. So you'll have that for at a later time. And we so appreciate both of you giving your time and your expertise and giving this presentation to us. I'm sure it's made us all more aware of all the things we should be thinking about daily as we drive. And we see those bicyclers that are on our left or right or wherever they are, to pay more attention and to do the right thing, which is to give them the courtesy that we as drivers want. So thank you for reminding us.
We appreciate being part of this program. Thank you very much for having us.
Yep. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that attended and for all your great questions and comments throughout.
Okay, well, thank you for the education. everyone, if you enjoyed this class and you'd like to be involved in any of our classes, you can always go to the AARP site and see what we have for the rest of the spring quarter, and then we do classes again in the fall. And so both to Lisa and Tessa, if you ever want to expand this program and have other things you'd like to share, let us know, because we're always looking for classes that give all of our community information. And now that we're on Zoom, you can invite anyone anywhere to watch this presentation once we have it posted. So thanks again to everyone. Appreciate your time.
We'll
Thank
see you.